Right, are we ready to go?
Not yet. No, it's just loading.
All right.
It's on a go slow.
Yeah.
Wendy?
Sorry, hang on, Councillor Key.
Who's that little face with the woolly hat?
Right, we are now live.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Wendy, can you take a roll call? See who's come back and who hasn't, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Bloxham.
Present.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Present.
We have apologies from Councillor Coleman. Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor De Sarum.
Present.
Councillor Gazzard.
Present.
And I understand Councillor Howe has left the meeting. Councillor Key.
Present.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Present.
Councillor Pook.
Present.
Councillor Pratt. Is Councillor Pratt in the meeting? No. Councillor Skinner.
Present.
Councillor Whibley.
Present.
Councillor Woodward.
Present.
Councillor Ragg.
Present.
Thank you, Chairman. The meeting is still quorate.
Thank you, Sarah. Right, we move to application 20-0425, minor application on page 62, Dunkeswell and Otterhead, and it's Wellsprings Farm, Pound Lane, Up Ottery, Honiton, and the ward members, Councillor Key and Councillor Brown. Do we have the applicant in the meeting, please? Mr. Michael Drew.
Present, Chairman.
Was that?
Yes, Chairman.
Yes, sir. Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Drew. See you wearing your halo. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll be told when there's 30 seconds remaining. But first we go to Mr. Rhodes for his presentation of the application, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so we've got Wellspring Farm. We've got an application for a replacement farmhouse that also involves the demolition of some barn and creation of a walled garden out of the original footprint of the house. The application's here because it's contrary to the view of the ward member. And we're in the AONB here, so reminder to members that we need to give great weight to conserving and enhancing the landscape. It's a rural farmstead. The photos will show that. And just to make you aware, there are levels issues across the site and across the valley. So the site is viewed from the road and further across the valley there. So this is the layout of the site at the moment. You can see the farmhouse here where my cursor is, and you can see a number of barns that are across the site and the access that comes in. And these are the elevations of the existing farmhouse and some of the barns on the site. And this is the proposed layout. So you see that the farmhouse is removed and a walled garden is formed. Barns are removed, and then the replacement farmhouse is built on the site. And then we have some levels changes here with banked up earth to flatten out this level to enable the part of the house to be built. And these are the elevations of the new build dwelling. So you can see the scale and the design of it there, the front and the rear elevations. and the floor plan's unusual sort of V-shaped building arrangement. And these quickly show some of the levels. So the proposed levels are in green, the existing is in red. So you can see as it cuts across the site, there's some levels changes required in order to get the access in and to get the bigger footprint for the proposed dwelling. And the photos, we've got the existing farm building here, and then you can see the outbuildings, and this is the approximate location where my cursor is for the new dwelling. Again, zoomed in on that, so you can see the levels changes here and why there'll be some banking proposed to create those levels, and some of the buildings on the site, just typical farm buildings, some of which would be removed. And again, you can see the existing dwelling there, which I'll mention in a minute. And then views from the lane back up, so you can just about see the dwelling, and this is the location here for the new dwelling. So roughly here, I understand these trees have been felled, and they would need to be felled as part of the application anyway. So you'll see in the report that the main issue is policy H6 of the local plan. So that does allow replacement dwellings in the countryside, and it's subject to a number of criteria. The first criteria is that there's a permanent dwelling on the site, which there is, so it meets that criteria. Second one is that the building should be on or adjacent to the existing footprint of the dwelling. And it's not in this case, it's about 30 meters away from the footprint of this dwelling, of the existing dwelling. Although the policy says that you can depart from being adjacent or on the existing footprint if there is a clear benefit from the new location. The applicant has stated that there's a sustainability benefit from the new build that can be built to better standards than the existing farmhouse, and that the current farmhouse suffers from damp and water egress, and this can be improvements from the new application. But there's, as I'll mention, that this is much more prominent location for the dwelling, so it's and there's concerns about its scale, so that questions whether there's a clear benefit from the moving of the footprint of the building, bearing in mind its prominence in the AONB. The third criteria is it shouldn't detract from the AONB and the landscape. The loss of the barns are considered to be acceptable, but as I've mentioned, the footprint of the new dwelling would go to a more prominent position that would be viewed across the valley and from the road. It's a non-traditional design. It's very large in its footprint and scale. And it's be elevated on this on a sort of terrace plateau there, so much more prominent than the existing feature. And of course, the existing building is considered to be attractive at present. So there's public views. You'll see from the report that there's quite lengthy comments from the landscape officer and the conservation officer raising that there's limited justification to the new design and new footprint, and raising concerns about the visual impact and prominence on the to the AONB. The other reason, the other issue you notice in the report is related to architectural importance. You'll see there's comments from the county archaeologist who's raising an objection to the loss of the existing farmhouse. And that's also commented on by the conservation officer. So there's a belief from both of those officers that there's potential historic historic value in that existing farmhouse. It's a traditional farmhouse, and it might possibly be of merit and therefore worthy of retention. And the archaeologist and conservation officer are saying that there hasn't been enough evidence and justification for the loss of that building, which should be considered a non-designated heritage asset. And obviously we have a duty to protect those heritage assets and give those special regard, and to protect them in accordance with policy H6. So in the lack of that full investigation and value, the loss isn't considered to be justified from a heritage perspective. So to conclude, the replacement dwelling is considered to be acceptable in principle. H6 allows that, but this scheme is considered to be contrary to H6, given the loss of the existing farmhouse isn't justified. So it's contrary to the archaeologist and the conservation's comments, and more information would be needed to justify its loss. The new location isn't on or adjacent to the footprint of the existing building, and that hasn't been justified. There's the scale and visual impact from the building is considered to be harmful to the AONB due to the design and its increased scale and position. And that's again replicated in the comments for the landscape officer in terms of harm to the AONB. I think there could be a scheme here that could be had. I don't think it's this one. The applicant would need to justify the loss of that existing farmhouse, which they haven't done adequately to date. And there potentially have to be a different design of farmhouse or replacement dwelling that would be approved on the site. But in terms of the scheme in front of you, it's recommended for refusal. It's contrary to policy H6. The relocation of the dwelling on the site hasn't been justified. The loss of the existing farmhouse hasn't been justified, and there's a harmful visual impact on the AONB, all reflected in those comments from the Conservation Officer, County Architect and Landscape Architect. So for that reason, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Mr. Drew, please, can I invite you to speak?
Thank you, Chair. First, I'll deal with the existing house. The existing house is quite unremarkable. It is made of a variety of plastics, asbestos, cement and hardboard inside. The only people to actually enter the building during this process have been Mr. Luxton and myself. The invitation was there for other people to have a look at, but they didn't. The house is founded on green sand. The back corner of it is founded on green sand. It's got 5 high tensile struts holding it together transversely. It is also failing longitudinally, and it is moving. As well as that, there is a disused quarry behind the house, which was filled in the 1950s to 70s. The main drain from that goes around the back of the house, around the corner of the house, under the corner of the barn, which in this proposal says to be demolished, and then issues in front of the building. If you go back to the red door on the side of the small dairy, the drain is underneath those steps, which takes all of the outfall from the previous quarry. That's really all to say on the house. It's founded on green sand. I'm a civil engineer and geotechnical engineer. I understand these things as much as anybody else. With respect to the archaeologist's report of the 23rd of April looks like it was completed some 10 days or more before Mr. Luxton's report, which is the detailed survey of the property. So the archaeologist's report does not take into account what in fact Mr. Luxton said. Mr. Luxton was appointed at the request of Mr. Reed, the archaeologist, and the reports then were transferred, but I can see the report hasn't been amended. With respect to the landscape architect, all I can say is that his considered opinion in the Constantine document says the overall proposals are considered to have a moderate adverse landscape and visual effect. One other point that I'd like to make is that it is for us to make sure it's appropriate for the economic, social and well-being of the area. All I can say is that the previous occupiers of this house have all been tenants, mainly because anyone who has the resources to own such a farm as Wellsprings would not choose to live in a house such as Wellsprings. And myself as an owner occupier, this would be very different. With respect to the scale of the property, I did submit an alternative reduced size of property in both floor area and southwest elevation on the 20th of June. However, that was declined to be examined because it was too late in the process. That really is much as I've got to say on the matter, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Drew. Ward members, Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes. Unfortunately, yes, I mean, the smaller design of this dwelling was too late to, in actual fact, to put into the application. What I would like to point out is there's a little bit of controversy with regard to the conservation area, because the conservationist, our own conservationist of East End District Council, has never been inside the property, right? And as the applicant said, It had a new roof put on in the early 80s, which was when they actually had grants put on. The windows and the access door are of plastic. You will see that there are, if you go back to the house elevation, there's been 2 wall ties put in there, because when they extended it, and you can see the extension of the property, which is from where the downpipe is, where that fence is, that was added on several years later, and they've had to put wall ties in because the walls are parting. Now, if you look at those windows there, the far right one up at the top is where the kitchen is. You then come down 3 foot in floor level to the next window where the next room is. And the bottom room, the bottom window there, you come down another further 3 foot or 3'6" to the lower room. So there's nearly 7 foot difference between the floor level of the bottom room and the top room. And I mean, how anybody can live in that sort of circumstances is utterly ridiculous in this day and age. In the parish of Upottree, we have 59 listed properties and memorials. 16 of those are farmhouses. 9 farmhouses are not listed, and this is one of them. And it certainly does not warrant any listing with the alterations that have been done to it. What would have happened is that this would have been demolished, partially demolished, and extended to make a lovely walled garden. The actual size of the house, I did have concerns at the very beginning that it was large, and was concerned about the size of it. The actual buildings there are of no consequence, apart from one building, which is going to be actually restored, well, sort of restored and uncovered, because it has lean-to buildings on it. If you can actually show them, if you could show the ones there, Mr. Rose, if it was possible. There, that one, I mean, is insignificant. It used to be the dairy for the farm there, but that has not been used for years. Can we go back to the previous one there? Whoops, gone again. No, back to the previous there.
Yep.
Now, the main building on the right there with the apex roof on it, that is to be retained and going to be looked after. The piece on the left has been added on in recent years because it's got concrete slabs on the side there, and it's going to be demolished to actually improve that building, which is a very, very nice building there. The trees have gone, as been said by Mr. Rose, which is where the actual, if there is another picture that shows that, okay, there was another one, Mr. Rose, that showed, I think, part of the building where it had been demolished. There, well, that's right, that's right. Now, the building on the right-hand side is an old timber cubicle house, which is obsolete anyway and falling down. The building on the left was another building that is partially falling down. Was a partially steel erection and wooden and galvanized. That is to be demolished and make way for where the house will actually start there. The actual design of the house, I feel, is really overpowering, and I think the applicant realizes this, and this is why he wanted to come in with a much smaller version. But unfortunately, I think that apart from the actual size and design of the house, all of these other problems that have been arisen by the conservationists have no standing whatsoever, because Mr. Stephen Reed, the conservationist at Devon County, he appointed this person, Mr. Luxton, to actually do a survey of it. And he came back and he went through it with a fine-tooth comb, the property, and it has no actual parts of it there that need keeping. Okay, you've got 4 walls, but they're going to be kept as part of the garden, the walled garden. I mean, the windows and that are all plastic, and so are the doors. So there's no character with it whatsoever. And when you've got a difference, you've got 3 rooms in there, and the difference in height from the one room to the top room in the kitchen is 7 feet. It's impossible to actually utilize anything like that. So I'll leave it for the others to discuss.
Thank you, Councillor Key. Councillor Brown, did you wish to speak?
Yes, please. Yes. You know, I support what David was saying there. You know, when you look at the report, you've got the archaeologists on page, well, my page is 58, your page is probably different, saying about the application and the early origins of the farmhouse and the loss of an historic farmhouse. That's totally nonsense. I've had buildings which people have tried to list recently, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, including East Devon District Council, and they've got English Heritage out, and English Heritage's reply to that is if a building is worthy of retaining, it would be listed. This building isn't listed, so that gives you some idea about it not being worthy of being retained. I fully support knocking this building down and rebuild another property on it, but whether this property is the right property, whether it's going to enhance the Blackdown Hills or not is another question. But I do support the original building being pulled down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Right, to committee then. Councillor Skinner.
Madam Chairman, this is a difficult one, and it's difficult on the basis that when you hear the ward members, who obviously know this site extremely well, are advocating no merit in the building. The conservation officers' reports are advocating there is a possible mitigation in accepting this as conservation buildings. I think, could I ask a couple of questions of Mr. Rose, if I may, because it could lead me into where I'm going to go with this. Knowing that we are in the process with this pandemic, are we allowed to have site inspections? That's my question first.
So,
sorry, go on, Chris.
No, sorry. So since the lockdown was announced, no, we haven't been able to go into buildings for obvious reasons. We've been able to go to sites and walk around outside, but I'm expecting that advice to change over the next couple of weeks because obviously the lockdown restrictions are being relaxed. So going forward, I think there will be an opportunity to go into buildings socially distanced and with the right PPE, etc. But it hasn't been possible up to now.
Could I ask, thank you for that. Could I ask the next question, perhaps to the owner or to the ward members, is the building safe to enter?
Yes, can I answer that? Yes, I mean, the building would be safe to enter. Because I mean, it wasn't so long ago, probably 12 months ago, I suppose, that people were actually living in it. But I can't see what the point of actually going into it. Whereas I mean, it's been mutilated by the plastic windows, the new roof and such like already.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Key, for that.
Yeah. Can I just say something? Yeah. I mean, if it was worthy of being retained, it would have been listed. That's English Heritage version of things.
Yeah. As a planning committee, I think we have a duty of due diligence to absolutely understand where this is. And I will pull on what I believe Chris Rose suggested earlier on, in that he said exactly the words of what I was thinking was, I think there's an application to be done here, but I'm not really sure that this is the right one. And if I listen to the ward members and Councillor Key, I think I'm quite right in saying you had reservations about the size of the farmhouse that is being proposed. So it tends to beg several questions. It tends to say the policies that were in place, that we would have to go forward with a refusal of this application. And yet I tend to feel there's mileage in something here happening. Now, because we as committee members have not seen the building, and part of the conjecture is whether there is any merit in the building being retained or not. And in looking at the whole complex as a whole, it looks like there would be quite a large civil engineering works going on here. And when that is done, that actually it becomes quite visible. So from my perspective, one, I would suggest something like that if the buildings were going to be knocked down in some way, it's going to be moved around. Would we not be putting up a building that actually retained the stone from the demolished buildings that came down? And I'm saying that as a suggestion. In other words, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to mitigate between the obvious conservation officers with their views around retaining it, looking like a farm and it being a farm, and keeping that fenestration and making it look like it is, retaining the materials to keep that in place. But at the same time, what they're almost telling us is the house is all but uninhabitable. On that basis, there's so many questions to be asked. It nearly needs to go and have a look at it to understand it more. If that isn't possible, I don't really see, and I leave it for other members to see, how we could support the application as it stands. But I'm suggesting a site inspection, and I don't know where we would stand with that, so I need to take advice. I'm suggesting a site inspection because I think if we perhaps went to the site, and like all these things, you can see things on a map, but I do very much take on what the ward members say. They know their area, and I very much respect what ward members have to say in all applications. They know their area and they know it well. And actually the two ward members, and they're both in unison in supporting the way that they're feeling. So I believe what I don't want to do is just go out with a refusal per se, without really understanding the issues we've got here. But I just don't see how we could actually go for an approval either. So I'm struggling with this one, but I'm just trying to get the best from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. I'd like to ask Mr. Rose a question, please. There seems to be a bit of a contradiction, I believe, in the archaeologist's report. He said the information submitted in support of this application is not sufficient to enable an understanding of the significance of the farmhouse as a heritage asset. And then he goes on to say that it's a historic building. So who would submit the information? The applicant, to make it more of a heritage asset?
So the archaeologist is using the information that they have to hand, which includes old maps and evidence that they have. So from that information, they're saying that there has been a building here for a long time.
Yeah.
And that because of that, and because of some of the photos submitted, there's a possibility that it is of value, but that the information submitted to date isn't clear enough in confirming what that value is, if anything. Now, it might be that a further report confirms something along Councillor Skinner's lines, that actually the building isn't valuable, maybe reuse some of the materials, or it might confirm that it's of absolutely no value at all. But the archaeologist and conservation officer are saying that without that further information, and that would be aided by a visit by those officers, they can't say at the moment that the building is of no value.
No.
So I think that that's where they're coming from. And as I say, it might be that through a bit more information and the visit by those officers, that issue can be addressed. It might be that reuse some materials. It might be that none of it's of value. And then we can move on to talk about the design of the new dwelling.
Yeah, thank you. And the fact that there are Krupp frames within this building suggests that it could be very old.
There,
Okay.
can I come in, Chairman, please?
Yes.
There are no crook frames in this building, because I have spoken to the person who actually replaced the roof in the 80s, and there was no crook beams in that building. This is why they're just assuming that there might be buildings
Right.
in there. These people haven't a clue what they're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, that's what I mean. That's another contradiction. Okay, Councillor Book.
Thank you. It's, in a way, it's a pity that this application has got two elements, the demolition and the reconstruction of a building, because there's deficiencies in both, in my view. So far as the existing building, we aren't here to assess the suitability of that. We're just here, if that's to be kept, it's got to be an archaeologist's, a full archaeologist report to make a proper decision. And I don't think we have that information at all at the moment. So it's difficult for us to be able to actually make the decision on the demolition, because we don't have enough information to be able to form an opinion. If we look at the other aspect of the new building, all our policy, when we're looking at a new building, we've got to look at it to see how it's assess it, the proposal. Is it in keeping with the surroundings and with our policy? One of our first applications today, we saw someone who had put an application in, and there I thought we saw a design which had been put in great sympathy with the surroundings in the existing buildings, and acknowledging its position and the impact it would have on the scene. And we all agreed that that was a good application, and we approved it. Unfortunately, I think this one, because of its size, because of its position, its elevated position on the site, it doesn't have any sympathetic leanings towards that. And therefore, on the element of the application, which is the approval of a new building, because it doesn't comply with policy, but mainly because, in my mind, it doesn't comply with and fit sympathetically on the site, I would have to, I would support the officer's recommendation to refuse. On the other element, on the demolition side, we definitely need more information before we could actually make a decision. So on both those points, I would support the officer recommendation, which is to refuse at this point, but accept that should the building in future be shown have no architectural interest, another application can come forward, and I'd hope that another application coming forward would be more sympathetic, would fit more sympathetically with the site in scale and size and position, and would therefore more easily comply with our own policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pook. Were you making that?
I'm proposing then that
Okay.
that we refuse.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second. Councillor Gazzard.
Steve Gazzard, right.
Yeah, I'll second. Yeah.
Right, now we have Steve Gazzard to speak.
No, it's all been said by Councillor
Okay.
Pook, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, we go to Councillor Davey then.
Thank you. I also support what Councillor Pook has said. The prominence of the replacement farmhouse and the views that you would have of that, the design of it, I think are completely unacceptable at the moment. And I'm concerned about the loss of this farmhouse. I think it could be sympathetically modified. A step-down house is not, but you wouldn't want it if you were a disabled person. But there are many houses where you go down steps to get from one room to another. So I can't make much of the 7 feet. Councillor Key stated the house has been mutilated. Well, unfortunately, you know, that shouldn't be an argument for demolition. What you're saying is it's been very badly treated and therefore we should put it out of its misery. Much has been made of these wall ties, but the house has stood there for 2 centuries. There are plenty of historic buildings still held together with wall ties centuries later. In response to Councillor Skinner, I'm not quite sure what a site inspection would achieve. From the photographs, we've got a pretty good idea of the site. We can see the prominence of the proposed site of the replacement. And I can't see that an indoor visit is going to give us a very clear idea. We're not experts on historic buildings. We can't say, well, absolutely, it's this needs to come down. We're not designers, we're not experts, and so I don't think that would help. So I think even if the farmhouse was considered not suitable for habitation, and it clearly is, the replacement is completely unacceptable. So I've absolutely no hesitation in refusing this.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about the visual impact, and as we've already been told that there's a alternative plans for a building submitted, I don't see why we could possibly approve this one when the applicants are not intending to build it. So I'd have to refuse this. And I do like Councillor Skinner's proposal that if the farmhouse is to come down, that they use those materials in the new house.
Thank you. And Councillor Chamberlain.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I also support refusal of this at the moment with a few concerns. I also support Councillor Pook in what he said, and some of what Councillor Skinner has said as well, reference it from the demolition of the existing one. If some of those materials could be used in a new build somewhere on the site, I think that would keep the character of the area by using them. Site visit, it was raised when it was talked about the asbestos materials within the house, and if the property is in poor condition, I would have a few concerns that maybe if those panels aren't in good condition, maybe a site visit wouldn't be the best thing to do until we could ascertain that. So yes, I would also support refusal in this at this present moment in time until we have a bit more understanding of it.
Thank you. Councillor De Sarum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, having listened to the debate, I noted that I note that the ward members, they are giving us their local knowledge, as has been said, and they obviously feel that something should happen to this particular farmhouse, but clearly we've got a problem, and the problem is expressed quite clearly at page 76, where it says that the proposed development is a considerably greater scale than the existing dwelling, but that is not a concern, provided that the landscape and visual impact is acceptable. And from what I've heard, members are concerned about the landscape and visual impact. And I also heard that there is a possibility that if this were to be refused as per the recommendation, a further application would come before us, which might be more sympathetic. So it is with great reluctance that I go down the same route as advocated by Councillors Pook and Gazard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, over to Shirley for a sum up, because we're going to move to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Well, members, you have before you a motion to refuse for the 2 reasons set out in the report, which are to do with the scale, layout, external appearance of the replacement building, and the lack of information in relation to the historic evaluation work. If when your name is called, would you please confirm your support for the refusal, whether you're against the refusal or whether you wish to abstain. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Okay, members.
Okay, Councillor Bloxham.
I support refusal as per officer recommendation.
Councillor Brown?
I'll abstain.
Councillor Chamberlain?
I support the refusal as per officer's recommendation.
Councillor Davey?
Support refusal.
Councillor De Sarum?
Support the refusal as per the recommendations.
Councillor Gazzard?
Support refusal.
Councillor Key?
Abstain.
Councillor McLaughlin?
Support refusal.
Councillor Pook?
Support refusal.
Councillor Pratt?
Abstain.
Councillor Skinner?
Reluctantly, I have to support refusal.
Councillor Whibley?
Support refusal.
Councillor Woodward?
I support refusal.
Councillor Ragg?
Support refusal.
Thank you. So with 10 votes to support the refusal, I can confirm the motion to refuse is carried.
And 3 abstentions.
3 abstentions, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, now for the next application, 192674 full, Beer Social Club. Councillor Pook, I think, are you declaring an interest?
I've declared an interest and I will be going to the waiting room or wherever I'm put.
You're not going to the dentist. Okay. Right. Do we have Miss Collins, please?
I believe she is in the meeting. Let me just check.
I think she needs to be unmuted.
Hello.
Hello, Miss Collins.
Hello. Yep. Can I?
Hello. Yeah. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll be told 30 seconds before your time is up. So we'll go to Mr. Rose first for the presentation of the application, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so this is an application of the old Beer Social Club. It's demolition of the old social club and construction of 4 townhouses and 2 apartments. It's before you as Councillor Pook is the applicant on behalf of Beer Community Land Trust. You can see the site on here at the moment on the hillside in Beer, linear form of development with a road adjoining. On the hillside, it's in the built-up area boundary for Beer, outside of the AONB, but in a conservation area. And the application is put forward by Beer Community Trust, and it's for 100% affordable housing scheme. So that's the layout of the site at present, and this is the proposed layout. So you get some parking at this end of the site, access off the road, get 2 pairs of semi-detached houses and then 2 flats on the remainder of the site with some amenity space provided. And you can see the relationship to the areas of the surrounding properties, which is quite tight knit. And then you've got the floor plans of the properties, which are a suitable size, and the flats, and then we get the elevations. So with 3 floors at this level because of the level on the hillside, and then 2 floors on the roadside. And again, there's a number of sections with application that shows the difference in those levels across the site. And to the photo, so this green roof here is the existing building that's proposed to be replaced. So you can see how the building works its way up the hillside, and there's a zoomed in image. So this is the location for the site, and these are the buildings that are at the moment in quite a poor condition, but you can see how they sit with the road and the gable end of the adjoining property and the road to the rear. And again, you get an idea from this photo of the change in levels as you go up the hillside, and then the relationships to the properties below. So that's looking out down from the site to the surrounding properties. So In terms of the principle that it's in the built-up area boundary, there's support in the neighbourhood plan, which is made to meet for schemes to meet housing needs and to meet community housing. And that's exactly what this scheme is proposing to do from the Bere Community Trust to provide local housing for local people. There's an existing social club or old social club there, so we do have policies in the local plan that seek to prevent the loss of those. But you'll see from the report that it was made an asset of community value. That period for advertising of that has passed, and you will also see that the building was marketed from September 16 to 18-19 with no interest in it as a going concern, and the club closed a couple of years ago. And there's also alternative clubs and spaces in Bere. And I think that's reflected in the fact that when the Community Trust went out to consultation on their proposal, there was local support for the scheme and no concern regarding the loss of the old social club. So given that it's been marketed, there's no interest, there's alternative provision, and there's local support for the scheme and no concerns about the loss of the social club, that element's acceptable in principle. The local plan policy is for 50% affordable housing in Bere, so we would secure 3 of the units as affordable housing as part of this scheme, although it's the Community Trust's intention to provide all 100%, all 6 of those units as affordable housing, and that follows housing needs surveys that have been carried out in Bere that show that there's still a need for these units and the support for that. And obviously that weighs in favour of the proposal again. In terms of the design and appearance, that you can see from the photos, the current building has a poor appearance at the moment, not of any value, and the proposal works with the constraints on the site in terms of the levels, the materials. So pretty much following these adjoining buildings in terms of the use of render and the roof. 2 stories appropriate, render slate roofs, so the design is considered to be acceptable. And in addition to that, it also, even though it's a tight-knit site, it sits very comfortably in there. There's no windows facing each other or facing existing properties. The adjoining property has a gable end to the side of it, so there's no issue with looking back towards that property. So again, in terms of amenity and overlooking, those issues are considered to be adequately addressed through the design. There's 1-for-1 parking proposed, but given the location of the site very close to the centre of Bere, that ratio is considered to be acceptable. So you'll see from the report that the principle is acceptable, the loss of the club is justified. There's local support for this Community Trust scheme. There's an acceptable design, no harmful impact, and it will provide 100% affordable housing with 50% secured through a legal agreement. So given the lack of harm and given the benefits to local housing and the local support, the application's recommended for approval subject to the legal agreement to secure the affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Ms. Gollins, would you like to begin your presentation?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Rachel Collins of NDM Collins Architects and the applicant's architect. Firstly, we'd like to thank your officers for their time in working closely with us to develop this scheme sufficiently that a recommendation for approval has been afforded. And whilst an approval has been recommended, we felt it may be beneficial for the committee to hear in brief the reasoning behind some of the changes which have been undertaken to address concerns raised throughout the consultation period and the importance of the community-inspired scheme. The proposal on submission sought to demolish the redundant social club building and replace it with a terrace of 4 2-bed dwellings and an attached apartment block, providing 3 flats over 3 floors. The scheme before you today has been revised to provide 2 pairs of 2-bed semi-detached townhouses and 2 apartments over a 2-storey block, reducing the development from 7 to 6 units. It is worth noting at this point that the site is extremely narrow and steeply sloping, presenting significant constraints, which have played a large factor in the development and revision of the proposal. The following items outline the changes in brief. The proposal has been divided into 3 separate buildings to better work with the characteristics of the surrounding area and provide a greater permeability to the communal areas at the rear, along with off-road areas for pedestrians to access the properties. The orientation of ridge lines have been changed to run parallel with Berry Hill to reinforce the patterns found elsewhere in the surrounding conservation area. The existing flint wall which runs along Berry Hill will be salvaged and the stone will be reused in the construction of the new boundary wall. To address public concerns, the apartment building to the lower end of the site has been substantially lowered and now presents as a single-storey dwelling from the roadside. This has significantly reduced the impact on the cottages behind. And to address concerns regarding safety and accessibility of the proposed parking spaces have been positioned in a herringbone fashion to improve ease of access movements in and out. And there is, as Mr. Rose said, there's 6 spaces per unit. Whilst the above changes have resulted in a loss of 1 unit, we trust this demonstrates a commitment from the applicant to provide a proposal which satisfies the wider community requirements. And in regard to the community, Beer has around 30% holiday homes which inflate the local house prices. Therefore, schemes like these really are essential if local people are going to remain living in the village. The proposal surpasses the local plan requirement of 50% affordable housing and will provide 100% affordable, with 3 affordable rental units and 3 shared ownership units. Furthermore, as a community-led scheme, the ownership, management, including allocation and value, will remain in the community. During the community consultation process, the proposal received full support from the people of Beer, with 94% of respondents in support of affordable housing. This support reiterated the findings of the Housing Needs Survey completed in July 2018, where a need for 21 affordable homes in the next 5 years were identified. The proposal has undergone a thorough and considered process to arrive in its current form and presents an opportunity to significantly improve a redundant site within Beer. Beer CLT is confident the scheme addresses planning, environmental, ecology, social and community considerations and will deliver essential housing to the residents of Beer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Right, over to members. Councillor Key.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What an absolute wonderful opportunity for some of the youngsters to be able to get hold of something like this. To be quite honest, I think if it hadn't have been that that Councillor Pook was strongly involved with this, I think it could have been dealt with under delegation. But I fully support it, and I'm going to put forward the recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Key. Do we have a seconder, please?
Yes,
I'll second
I'll
that.
second that.
Oh, now, who do I choose?
Who's the second hand up? Who's the second hand up?
Well,
well,
sorry, Eileen. I think I got in first, but I've already seconded
think,
something. So
yeah,
I don't
okay,
mind-
that's
I don't
all
mind
right,
handing
Kathy.
that on. I said
I'll
I'd
second it if you want, Eileen, that's fine.
All
I'm quite
right,
happy
Sarah,
with this
thank
one.
you. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Skinner, you're slipping. You're second this time.
Never mind. Okay. I actually believe exactly to articulate all the things that Councillor Key has said, but to add 1 or 2 things to that, I think it's an excellent application. I think it's been put into a place that's really quite difficult to negotiate as far as in planning terms on very undulating ground. And isn't it strange how we've got a 3-storey bedroom houses here, and we only earlier on we actually approved 3-storey houses, and there was a sort of a nearly from 1 or 2 members wondering whether or not 3 stories were applicable. In this site, it absolutely is bang on the money in getting as much as you can out of a small piece of ground. I'm going to absolutely support the fact of the affordable housing element. I think it's fantastic that a village of this scale is getting affordable housing at this level. And I know housing in Beer, I know from my own knowledge, is that as soon as housing comes up, it gets bought up. Beer is a very sought after place to live, regardless of what type of housing it is. And it makes it very difficult for the young local people to be able to stay within their own village. So I'm absolutely 100% behind supporting this application. And I think no more needs to be said. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, a lot's been said. Can you speak if you're not repeating what's already been said, please? Councillor De Sarum. Oh, he's gone. Councillor Gazard.
No, it's already been said. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Pratt.
I would just like to say that this is an application which looks after the the development of the housing need in the community there.
Thank you. Right, we have a proposer, Councillor Key, seconded by Councillor Chamberlain. Over to you, Shirley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, members, you have a motion to approve subject to the conditions listed in the report and also subject to completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure the affordable housing also as set out in the report. If you would please confirm when your name is called that you support the grant or whether you're against the grant or whether you are abstaining. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bloxham.
Support as per officer recommendation.
Councillor Brown.
Support.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Support as per the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Davey.
Support.
Councillor De Sarum.
Support the grant as per officer recommendation.
Councillor Gazzard.
Support.
Sorry, wait me a minute.
Councillor Key.
Approve.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Approve.
Councillor Pratt.
Support.
Councillor Skinner.
Support as per the recommendation to approve.
Councillor Whibley.
Support.
Councillor Woodward.
Support the approval.
Councillor Ragg.
Approve.
Thank you. So that was unanimous. So I
Yeah.
can confirm the motion has been approved.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Can we bring Jeff Poot back in now? And thank you, Ms. Collins, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Poot back in yet?
I'm here if you can see me. Can you hear me?
Welcome back, Jeff.
I saw you all on YouTube. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well done. Good initiative. I'm sure.
Well,
you know,
if I just say very quickly, we're talking about the housing company. These are the schemes the housing company can take on.
right. Gotcha. Okay, final application. 200568 variation Woodbury in Limpston. This is for Bridge Farm, Stony Lane, Woodbury Salterton. Ward members are councillors Ingham and Councillor Young. I don't know whether they've notified to speak. There is no applicant, and the application is here because the applicant is a member of staff. So over to you, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so this is an application to vary plans on the previous consent. As you said, it's an application from a member of staff. It's a dwelling in the garden of Bridge Farm at the moment. There's lots of history to this, as you'll see in the report, going back to 2014, predating the purchase of the plot from the current applicant. But in effect, there's consent on this site for access off here for a new dwelling, and this application seeks to amend the plans for that. So you can see the trees around the site, and this footprint as proposed here is as per the previous consent. What the applicant is doing in this case is removing a single-story extension that's off of this wing that was previously approved, but adding a tiny bit at second floor over here. So it just changes the elevation slightly. So we've got a slight larger element at 2-story, but we've got a large wing that has been a single-story wing that's been removed as part of this application. So this is the previous scheme. So in effect, they're removing this single-story element here, tiny 2-story extension on there. And other than that, the window fenestration is very similar. You can see from this, it's quite a distance from the main dwelling, so there's no issue with overlooking. The access and all the relationship to trees stay the same, and given the trees that surround the site, there's no visual impact harm, and there's no harm to neighbouring amenity. So given the relatively small change to something that's already been consented, the application is recommended for approval with conditions.
Thank you. Councillor Key.
Thank you, Chairman. This probably would have been another one done under delegation if it hadn't have been the applicant was a member of staff. So I'm going to put forward the approval of the recommendation.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder, please?
I'll second that. That's Kathy McLaughlin. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Should we move to the vote on this then, please? Or do you want to speak, Shirley?
Sorry, it took a while to get to the mute button. No, I think members are fully aware that this is a grant of permission subject to the conditions listed in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, you taking the vote on this?
Yes, Chairman, I am.
Thank you.
Councillor Bloxham.
I support the recommendation to approve.
Councillor Brown.
Support.
Councillor Chamberlain.
I support the recommendation to approve.
Councillor Davey.
Support approval.
Councillor De Sarum.
Support approval.
Councillor Gazzard.
Support.
Councillor Key.
Approve.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Support approval.
Councillor Pook.
Support approval.
Councillor Pratt.
Support approval.
Councillor Skinner.
Support approval.
Councillor Whibley.
Support approval.
Councillor Woodward.
Support approval.
And Councillor Ragg.
Support approval.
Thank you, and I can confirm that that's a unanimous approval.
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's meeting. I'd like to thank everybody who's contributed and declare the meeting closed. Thank you. Thank you to the officers as well.
Thank you, Eileen, very much.
Thank you, David.
Yes.